Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chulo. Today, I have an awesome show for you guys today. Unfortunately, Papi could not make it today. We do have one of our regular guests today. Muay Thai Matt is here to join us while he's lighting up a cigar. Thanks for joining us, Muay Thai Matt. And
Pleasure to be here.
yeah, and unfortunately, since Papi's not available, we actually reached out to the podcast temp agency, and they sent over a fill-in host. All I got into the resume just it says that it's Top G. Is that correct, Mr. Top G?
Let me tell you something, Chulo. I've always heard you had to help the little man. So when the podcast temp agency called me up, I answered the call. So I'm here. I'm going to help you guys out. Whatever you're talking about today, I'm really just hopping, get the job done. Get the job done.
So what's your real name? All I have is Top G on my on the resume here.
You may have heard me as Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, you familiar with me?
Oh yeah, I think I know who he is. Matt, Muay Thai. I'm very surprised that you let him into your home. Just throwing that out there,
How could I say no? Such an enigmatic personality.
Listen, whatever we're going to talk about, let's get down to business. We're going to get the job done. All right? What do we got here for today?
Okay. Well, I know Muay Thai is gonna talk about an issue with us today. We're gonna be covering what was it, narcissism, and what's the other part we're gonna be covering?
We'll talk a little bit about narcissism, and then we'll get into gaslighting. They can go hand in hand.
Wow,
Okay.
This is perfect. Narcissism and gaslighting, two things that the Matrix, the government, the bigwigs, all are making up just to get into your head. I'm happy we're talking about this. Please proceed, brother.
Okay, so actually, I'll start with a question. So, what do we think is the general understanding of narcissism in today's culture? So, where do people get their ideas from for that?
Well, I guess we could open it up to our guest, Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll take the lead, Chulo. All right, listen. It's all made up. Everybody has an ego. Everybody needs that ego. Doesn't matter if you're ignorant. Doesn't matter who you step over. You need to do what you got to do to get what you want. Because if it isn't you, it's somebody else. So that's why I reach out to my people who, wherever they are, all over the world, millions of followers, and I tell them what's essential for them to survive, which is you got to be the bigger man.
Well, I'm not sure if you understand what the topic and how the approach that
So,
we
is
have.
narcissism a psyop?
Exactly. Now you're catching what I'm throwing here. All right. None of this softiness. You got to be real. You got to tell the kids what they need to hear, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
don't think this is gonna work out, Top G.
Yeah,
We
no.
gotta go.
Hey,
We gotta wheel you out.
throw
Wait.
my-
We gotta
Whoa. You're
we
going to
gotta-
do this to
we
me?
gotta send you
You're
out.
going to do this to me? Do you know who I am? You know how many Bugattis I got?
Bugattis.
Oh my God, whatever, guys. You guys are jokes.
Excuse.
I'm done.
Get on out of here.
Sorry about that.
There's a mirror in the bathroom if you wanted to spend time with yourself.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. The Top G, quote unquote, would not. Just didn't make the cut for us. So now you're gonna be stuck with Muay Thai Matt and myself. Let's try and get Papi back. See if he can make his way back to us.
I messaged him. He said he was running late. I
Okay.
actually didn't know if he would make it, but I guess picking up where we left off, I wanted to pick this topic because I'm curious about maybe like what we feel the general understanding of narcissism might be. So you have armchair psychology, pop psychology, TikTok psychology that comes up a lot too, and I hear the word narcissist a lot. So I don't know. Have you heard anything? Like, if I were to ask you based off what you've heard on social media, how would you explain narcissism, or at least how the media portrays it?
Whenever I hear the term narcissism discussed in popular media, it almost makes it sound like maybe 50% of the population are narcissists. That it's so prevalent, so common that by a mere act of selfishness that person is immediately deemed a narcissist. But if you've ever actually met a narcissist, you would know the difference between them and a regular person who has, typical tendencies of wanting to be selfish, because that's every human being, right? Where all of us have a desire to be selfish. but it I don't know. I'll flip it back on you. Have you ever authentically met an actual narcissist, like a person who, I guess, if you were to diagnose them or treat them, is an actual narcissist based off of their actions?
You know, that's a good question, and I will say maybe.
Okay.
We gotta. Ah,
Hey, he made it.
you made
What's
it.
up,
Sorry
Poppy?
for the day, guys.
Well, I'm
Welcome
happy
in.
you can make it.
Sorry, guys. Really,
Did you see that crazy
I
dude
saw
on the
some
way out?
Bugatti like just driving out. Who was that
Oh
dude?
yeah. He kind of strong armed his way. You heard there
Yeah.
was a a podcast.
I
I
gotta
think
be
he
honest.
listed this studio with his.
I honestly didn't even say he could come here. I just saw him pop up on the screen, and I don't know why Matt let him in, but hey, as long as we got him out, it's fine.
Well, let's not use that podcast temp agency anymore. Let's just stick to the locals around here.
Cool. Let's do it.
All right, what are we talking about?
So we were kind of just asking about narcissism, how you've heard of it, what you've seen. He was
For-
asking me if I've seen it, but yeah, go on.
I mean, the first thing that pops in my mind is just pride. A prideful person, full of themselves, can't get anything wrong. From their perspective, always in the right, even though you may reveal a more honest reality, unwilling to let go of their opinion, their stance.
How about in pop culture? How have you seen it portrayed?
I've heard that the celebrities that have tested, politicians that have tested on those official narcissism tests that I'm sure you'll talk about at some point, actually score higher than the common man. And it makes sense, when your ego is just filled with constant attention, you do start thinking of yourself a little bit more than you should. You see yourself in a light that isn't healthy. That isn't healthy. So that's what I would say for celebrities, at least, which is probably like anytime I go through a phase where, like, I want a little bit more attention, more popularity, have more recognition, and then I hear these other stories of the people that actually get it. I actually feel good about my circumstances as like a humble fisher. I mean, look at my Bass Pro cap here, and just a local man in the community. I actually love little Steubenville for that reason. Is that what you were asking?
Well,
Yeah,
see,
yeah. So
Poppy,
there's
I had a slightly different understanding of my experience when it comes to narcissism. I hear that term thrown around a lot, and I think I want once we get to the term gaslighting, I think I'm gonna say the same thing, because you hear the term so much over and over again that a person who has a natural tendency to want to be selfish, they'll be accused of being a narcissist, but when you actually talk to real narcissists, you actually like, hold on a second. There's a difference between a regular person that tends to be wanting to be selfish here and there compared to an actual person. And I think your description is actually correct when it comes to narcissism.
Yeah.
so last question to start with. I guess you can answer either one. One of them is: do either of you feel like you know someone who has actual narcissistic personality disorder, or who comes to mind when you think of narcissism in North America?
uh, well, off the top of my head, well, first and foremost, I want to share that I had a good buddy who said some of the best historical leaders in history were actual psychopaths because they were able to make decisions. To say a military general, make decisions according to what is best for the time being, regardless of who was dying. You know, willing to sacrifice the few for the many, and then they also tended to be narcissists, legitimate narcissists, because they also had to be able to plow through the various opinions of all these other people. Now that could be for the detriment of the mission, but if they're a good military person, it was for the betterment. So that's what I think of. Now, do I know anybody in my life that's a legit narcissist? No, I've just met very proud people. That's for sure. I've met
Mhm.
very, very proud people. Maybe in the salsa scene, that tends to be a high ego world where people want to be the best, most impressive, most attractive, most manly, most curvy, whatever. How about you, Chulo?
Uh, I will say, you look at the political world and you can see a lot of narcissists there, or that and the celebrity world. I definitely think there's a lot of them out there. Personally, I can say that I have met one narcissist, and I was involved in this person's life kind of, I don't want to give too much away because I don't want to get called out on a. I will say this: you guys don't know this person, so but I've realized that the person was extremely manipulative, and the person desired perfectionism and obedience by all the people around him without him ever having to show any of that to his friends or loved ones. And the moment you dared question it, he would become the victim of like, well, what did I ever do? And it was a person that I no longer really wanted in my life anymore. So I just kind of phased that person out. So it really affects dramatically the people around him. And I got to know some mutual friends and the other people. And I think this is one of the reasons why I found out that I wasn't the crazy one, because I started thinking like, am I overthinking this? Am I, putting too much emotion into this relationship? And when I talked to mutual friends, they had the same exact experience, feeling
Hmm.
used, feeling like they needed to step up and be perfect, while the other person never felt the necessity to do any of that. Go ahead.
Are we talking about the mutual ex-friend?
No, 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 no.
Oh, okay.
Although that's funny that you bring that up.
Although he now that we're talking about it, he actually might fit, everything that you just said actually kind of fit in his categories.
See, I wasn't thinking about him, but
two,
that's funny that you mentioned that.
yeah, two things. You said a key phrase. We just got some yeah.
Balloons.
Anyway, some excitement going on over here in the camera. Um, you said, "Am I the one who's crazy?" And that's what tends to be the giveaway for yourself, where you start doubting your own reality because of how clever and manipulative this other person has been. Will you be talking about maybe some somatic narcissists or cerebral narcissists? Have you heard of those terms? Because they're like subcategories within the narcissism world that I've heard.
I was going to ask,
And,
are
and
there
just one
different?
example, I
Go ahead.
do think that I've met a cerebral narcissist, a religious person entering the religious life, a not a business Melkite, right, within the Roman Catholic Church, young buck. I was in my late 20s. He was in his early 20s. He was in that right. You're allowed to get married, and so he was there with his to be his fiance, and he was arguing the case that the Melkites, the oldest, the best, the most legit tradition that offers you most amount of graces right away and the best way and the only way it should be. And my simple response was just like, okay, if God was here and I would have, if I would have asked him, are his are his graces offered in the other rites, would he say no? And then he says he couldn't say yes. So that was my only point that I needed to prove. But he was still adamant about what he believed. There was just no changing it. And funny enough, I actually met his brother 10 years down the road, told him the story, and discovered that it was his brother. And he's like, yeah, he should be diagnosed a narcissist. So that was funny that happened. But go ahead.
Yeah, there's definitely different expressions. So, why don't I start with the first or the where the name comes from? So, Greek myth, we may have heard of Narcissus, and so Narcissus was a very handsome man, as you would imagine, right? And with the Greeks, they love having some hamartia or like a fatal flaw. And for Narcissus, it was pride, obviously. So many fell in love with him, and he rejected them all with disdain, just completely disregarded them. In one version of this myth, a nymph called Echo falls in love with him, and Echo was infamous for repeating the last thing that someone would say. But long story short, he rejects Echo very emphatically to the point where Echo is so dejected could only spend the rest of her existence sobbing, and so all that was left was her sound. So if you go to a big empty place and you yell something, Echo will yell it back at you. So that's also where the myth of echoes come from. But anyways, so he continued scorning people, and the gods were kind of like, "Who is this guy? Like, who do you really think you are?" So they cursed him, and they caused him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. So this might sound familiar now. So he was so enchanted with his reflection that he wasted away. Some versions of the myth are that he fell in and drowned. Others are that he wasted away, turned into there's a flower named after him, I think. So, um, and then historically, like we have narcissism was very much thought of as like someone named Havelock Ellis in 1898 mostly saw it as a sexual perversion. Basically said if you masturbate a lot, that's narcissistic. Was basically what they were saying. Kind of like someone who's sexually attracted to their own image. So when we think of sex and psychology, who else comes up? It's Sigmund Freud. So 1914, he also wrote about narcissism in a landmark paper, and that brought also the idea of self-obsession into mainstream psychological thought. So I won't go too much into that. It was kind of it continued to be refined by other theorists until we have it in what we know it today in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which I'll talk about later. But so I touched on people that come to mind, but with media, we really see a lot of depictions of narcissism in some of our beloved characters. So like Marvel, Tony Stark, a very classic example. Genius billionaire, tremendous ego. I think Robert Downey Jr. portrayed him very well. So he shows traits, but what allows him to become a beloved character is his ability to evolve as he's grappling with his own flaws, and he learns to care for others through loss. Other pop culture depictions, Regina George. So I don't know if you were ever subjected to watch Mean Girls, but Regina George,
I
the
had a
queen bee
sister.
of her
Yep.
high school, extreme self-importance, desire to control others, lack of empathy, big emphasis on personal gain to maintain social status. So like high school Mean Girls. And it's interesting that that comes up as a archetype because you have the cliques you have in high school, and you usually have like the pretty girls who are trying to maintain status, and it's also in adolescence and early adulthood that we are our most narcissistic. So I like that they had that.
With Tony Stark, that's something that I tend to see in movies where they make this narcissistic person so appealing, so attractive, regardless of how cocky, full of himself he is. And that's always been one thing that's bothered me about Hollywood, is that that's almost like where they stop. What I love about Marvel is that they had these two contrasts of this super cocky man who is very talented and puts out, but then you also have Captain America, the super humble man who is still the captain. And there's this beautiful scene in help me out with the which movie it was. It was when they're fighting in the downtown area where those monsters are coming in through that portal.
That's
And
the Avengers, the first one.
oh yeah, okay, and Tony Stark, Iron Man, when they all circle up and they're about to engage, Tony Stark says, "Your call, Captain." So he deferred to Captain America, and I love that. And yes, you're right that he did grapple with his vices, his ego. His partner in the movies also challenged him a lot on that, and he softened up. And then he also had Spider-Man to Peter Parker to help him out with that as well. He finally started thinking about somebody else other than himself. And then, of course, he does the ultimate non-narcissistic thing. Well, it actually could be the most narcissistic thing. He's like, I will die to save this universe, and then people will know me forever. But I don't think he did it for that reason. He did it for the way the movie portrayed it, out of like self-sacrifice. Yeah, yeah. Hit me with another beer.
So there's definitely redemption.
Mhm.
Yeah. Really quick, Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. So he's also a very classic narcissist. One of my favorites, I want to talk about him just a little bit. American Psycho, Patrick Bateman.
Oh, that guy's crazy.
So Bret Easton Ellis is the author who wrote the book. I watched the movie first. I don't recommend it really. I mean, if you've seen it, you've seen it. I also don't recommend the book, but if you've read it, you read it. Just because it gets pretty explicit. It's very disturbing as well. But he does a really great job of getting into the inner workings and inner monologue of a narcissist's mind with some artistic embellishment, of course, but very over the top with these getting into psychotic behaviors as well, which is not necessarily part of narcissism. So an example that I like is if you read the book, he spends pages and pages talking about fashion choices. The main character, Patrick Bateman, is I don't think I ever figured out what he did, but I guess he's working finance. but he wears these really expensive suits, and he can tell you where he got all of them, the rarity, down to the fabric, like the wool fabric and where the wool's from. And he'll just describe it like ad nauseum. And not only will he do that, but as he's sitting down with coworkers, he'll describe their suits and he'll say like, "Oh, Pierce is wearing this, this, and that, but that was last fall's fashion or something."
Wait, isn't that portrayed in the business card scene
Yes,
where
it's
there's
I was
just
gonna bring that up. The business card
this
scene, yeah.
like memorable? I love that scene for whatever reason. Could you tell the story, Chulo?
Yeah, so he's super hyped because he just got his new business cards, and the font, the thickness of the paper, the color, the kind of white of the paper, and just like the layout of it. So he's super proud coming in and like, hey guys, check out my new card. And then everybody, it's like I'll call it a measuring contest
Hmm.
where they just start comparing cards, and he comes to the very end, and he one of his coworkers pulls out his card, and he's looking at it, and it's a beautiful scene in the sense that it portrays the inner turmoil of this really unimportant moment in the movie, of like their lives. They're literally just comparing little white pieces of paper, and he's there, and he's like sitting there looking at the card, and you're listening to the inner monologue, and he's starting to sweat, and it just like he's having this physical reaction over the fact that somebody else has a better business card than him. And he almost has that moment where he just kind of like drops the card, like he feels so defeated. And yeah, what a classic scene. You can find it on YouTube easily, and for me it would always pop up on the reels. So yeah, what a scene. That's that. When you were talking Muay Thai, it was that scene that was coming up, the business cards.
So you
yeah.
would classify that as narcissistic to be so you reach a point where you're even so petty about the minute stuff. I could see that happening. You're so warped up in your presentation, how you look, how you dress, that even a business card can become like the utmost importance to your value, your social value.
Yeah, so what I liked about that was like he feels upstaged by business cards, which is odd, right? But every moment is a battleground and every social meetup is an arena where he has to come out on top. So it's like I think on the more grandiose side of narcissism, you do have a lot of what we would say pathology and like neurotic behavior where you feel threatened by things. So there's this dance with confidence, but also sometimes it betrays a deep-seated like anxiousness about yourself too, which we'll get into.
Can I share
But
one
yeah,
thing? Can I share one
yeah,
thing about the narcissist that I met? I hope it's not enough information to give the person out, but when I first started my very first podcast that I made, Broken Spear podcast, many years ago, I shared that I was doing this podcast, and this person was so caught up in showing how much they've done in life that they said, "Hey, can you call me your producer for your show?" And I thought, I guess like if you want to start helping me find, guests for the show, you're more than welcome to. That same day, I get a notification on LinkedIn that he had officially put it on his LinkedIn profile that he was a producer for the Broken Spear podcast. So it was to me, it was a really big telling moment. And as we were speaking, I just went through to his LinkedIn to see if it was still there. It's gone, but I've never seen so many things that a person is involved in on a person's LinkedIn. It's quite interesting. The need to show, the need to be a showman of their accomplishments, or like what's his name, Patrick Bateman, is it?
yeah,
Or yeah,
Patrick
it's
Bateman.
Patrick Bateman. His the need for the clothes, the fabric, the style, the business cards.
Yeah, so I've also heard, so all of this, you could tell that there's this little ego inside this narcissist that is just afraid of being discovered and is doing everything possible to just mask whatever he needs to mask before the world finds out who he truly is. Now, I don't really know if that's what a narcissist, diagnosed narcissist really is. And because a part of me wants to say that in their mind, they believe they're so comfortable with themselves because they believe this reality And even though it's illogical to the actual reality, how would you distinct that? Like, here's an insecure person, but I've always thought that a true narcissist could care less about what others think, and rather they just do things because they do. Their mind is so warped in their own belief, in their own convictions.
The distinction is they don't care about what others think if it does not affect them somehow. So if they're not affected by it, if they're not standing to gain, then they don't care. If they're not standing to lose, then they don't care. But if they have like a horse in the race with any particular person, then you become an object of interest. There's also like the potential to see what you could do for them. And yeah, we'll get into a little bit of the underlying anxiety that I was talking about. But yeah, I guess to finish with Patrick Bateman, they did this cool thing where we talked about narcissists, and one of the scenes in this movie is where he's having sex with a prostitute, but he is actually staring at his own reflection while he's doing this, and he's flexing, and it's on reels too. So that's pretty another popular scene. So I thought that was very telling, very clever. So pop quiz, you get one guess each. What do you think the prevalence of narcissistic personality disorder is in the United States?
Diagnosable narcissism, you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of
10%.
percentage, okay.
10, and what were you saying?
I was gonna go lower. I was gonna go that it's a fairly smaller percent. I'm gonna go between, I want to say 3 to 4%.
Okay, so it is anywhere between 0.5% all the way up to 6. Some studies say 6%. So the population in the United States, I think, is, what is it, 345 million people, something like that. It's tricky to get a handle because, like, we're looking at either it's self-report studies. I don't know if they are adding it to a tally when they're diagnosing in sessions with counselors, but it could be kind of challenging to pin that down. Gender differences are pretty interesting too. So it is more diagnosed in males than females, but we're beginning to think it's because narcissism in females can also present differently, a little more covert, and we'll talk about covert narcissism soon. The ratio is about 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. Some studies suggest that 75% of those diagnosed with NPD are men, but that's diagnosed with NPD, not the ones that slip between the cracks. Age of onset, so like where does it usually start? Symptoms will begin in early adulthood, and I mentioned adolescence. We usually see it's our most narcissistic period because we're trying to define our own identity and become very self-centered and obsessive about becoming our own person. Things like grandiosity, entitlement, we also see that in adolescence, but a formal diagnosis, you typically don't make it until adulthood. So another interesting thing is narcissistic traits tend to diminish with age as well. So as you get older, you don't see them as much, but other things like vulnerability to criticism might remain stable. So someone may always be vulnerable to criticism and always react poorly. So let's see, if we're going back to that 0.5 to 6, that means out of 345 million, 6% is about 20 million narcissists in the United States. 0.5% is about 1.7 million. So we have anywhere from 1.7 to 20 million in the United States, allegedly. Granted, though, that's still, I mean, it's a low part of the population.
I really want to talk about how females could be narcissists, because I heard of a term called, I mean, when you want to get to it, but I'm just mentioning it now, somatic narcissism, where you use your body, your sensuality, your touch, and I'm assuming your words and the way you, your tonation, where it could come with the flirt, because men have their strengths and then women have their other strengths as well. And for some reason, I'm curious.
So I think what that reminds me of is, so narcissism is in what's called cluster B personality disorders. And you'll usually see histrionic personality disorder in there. Where did I have this down? Yeah, histrionic, antisocial, which we also call like psychopaths. Borderline, so those ones. Histrionic has a lot, like kind of like what you're describing. There is a lot of self-centeredness, and you want the center spotlight, and you could be very flirtatious as someone with histrionic personality disorder. So there are there is some differential diagnosis to know which one it is. We'll get into that too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because we'll talk about that. What causes narcissism? Any thoughts?
Insecurities. Absolutely insecurities. A trauma, maybe.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so you're hitting one side where it is negative experiences that may cause somebody to overcompensate. Now, from my experience, I've experienced that type of pride of narcissism from people who consistently receive praise and then develop a big head. Praise, whether it's bodily, anatomically, cerebrally, intellectually, um,
Yeah,
other
I don't
forms
think
of praise.
I don't think those two are mutually exclusive because I think by the time that's the eventual goal, are getting those praises to be in high positions, to be constantly being praised and showered with compliments. That's the eventual goal of a narcissist because of the lacking of security, lacking of self underneath all of that. So I'm taking it all the way back to maybe a childhood trauma, and it eventually coming to fruition in their and when they become, I guess, when they come to the age of reason and they start trying to figure out, how do I no longer feel like this and I need to exude myself and, in a form of confidence and be praised. The way I no longer experience that is by doing these things, which eventually lead to narcissism.
Sure, sure, sure. I think maybe what I'm trying to say is pride can be fed in different ways. Pride can be fed from your hurt, your trauma, and there's this reaction for me to overcompensate, or pride can develop from a environment where I'm constantly praised and my ego just grows and grows and grows, and then I am fixated on, I become this person. Would is was that something you would agree with?
But yeah, feeding egos. So like one of the traits can be one of them is believing you're special, like much more so than other people. And you can be coddled as a child to feel as if you're special and be reinforced very strongly in that way. So it could be there's nature and nurture, right? So there's a little bit of there's chance of overindulgence, I think. But in terms of trauma and attachment, because one of the keywords I heard was insecure or insecurities. There is attachment theory. So this is also coming up a lot in I'm seeing it in pop psychology now. People are talking about attachment theories and like, well, I'm anxious attached, and they'll make excuses for their behavior somehow. But this comes from John Bowlby. So he was the 1950s British psychiatrist, and he was very interested in understanding emotional bonds between children and caregivers. So he believed children were like almost biologically programmed to form attachments with their caregivers as a survival mechanism. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure it was him who experimented on monkeys with he would give some monkeys like a wire mother, like a fake monkey made out of wires, and another one with like maybe like fur or something soft, and saw what the differences were. So it was kind of twisted because they didn't turn out great. Anyways, attachment styles do play a key role in developing NPD. So when we talk about attachment, there's secure attachment, and then there's also insecure. So for insecure, that's avoidant, dismissive, or preoccupied. So let's see, avoidant. So people with avoidant attachment, they'll downplay their need for emotional intimacy. And this could be because it's a survival mechanism. They didn't get that intimacy that they looked for or that connection from a formative age. So they distance themselves from others to protect against that vulnerability. It's kind of like, fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to let anyone do this to me again, kind of deal. So this can lead to grandiosity and lack of empathy. And the narcissistic tendencies and defenses avoid confronting feelings of inadequacy. So this is what I was getting at with anxiety or rejection. And these are very common experiences, like early attachment disruptions. So the grandiose narcissism, people will outwardly present themselves as superior, but they'll still maintain emotional distance, and that's it, just to avoid that vulnerability. There's also preoccupied or anxious attachment. So this is excessive need for approval and fear of abandonment. So this is a little more linked to what we would call vulnerable narcissism. Narcissistic traits are seeking constant admiration, validation, stuff like that. They need to cope with deep-seated feelings of insecurity and like not feeling worthy. So they're always looking for that validation. So it's interesting because we might think of people with narcissism as confident, but what they tell themselves, that there's a lot of power behind self-talk. So that defense mechanism, when it's operating at a high capacity, and your narcissistic defenses are high, you do feel that way. You know, you do tend to feel that you are top of the world, very special, that you deserve it, you're entitled for a lot of praise and admiration. So, but there's also the, what's it called? The covert narcissism, where it looks like when it's affected by depression, which I'll get into a little bit more, you're looking at narcissism operating from kind of like defeated narcissism, if that makes sense, when the defenses no longer work. So, what else?
I did not know that there could be so many different avenues that could lead you to develop narcissistic tendencies, which is kind of like what we're saying before, Chulo. It could be different scenarios in your life, trauma, being bullied, being whatever your situation is, maybe even being the skinny kid who didn't get the attention, and then you develop this overblown reaction. Probably as to why they follow this podcaster, well-known guy, Andrew Tate. Like, he's really feeding into the young male society. I would say giving them bad advice, advice at the expense of women, advice at the expense of humility. But what he's reaching out to, what he's like in their heart, is saying that you're special, you're important, you're a badass, you're worth it. You could attain it if you put the effort, and that justifies all your actions, whether you're a jerk, cocky, whatever. So it's bad advice. It's the only good part about it is that he's actually catering towards the hearts of men, but the advice he gives is horrendous. So have you guys like heard about Andrew Tate?
Yeah.
Sounds familiar. I don't know. Just I don't know.
Anyway,
I'm getting deja vu.
I would
Yeah, no
stay away from
coincidence,
that
right?
guy. Is what I would
Anyways,
say.
yeah.
So we are in agreement about narcissistic tendencies could come from everywhere. Because if you're saying depression, like, when have I ever heard a depressive person developing narcissistic tendencies? Never. So that's interesting that you're telling us this.
Yeah, so it's kind of like some researchers will consider narcissistic tendencies to be compensatory. How do you say that word? To compensate
Compensatory.
for. So
Compensatory, I think.
yeah, so if you feel rejected or abandoned in childhood, you'll develop these behaviors to compensate for your low self-worth, basically. But another thing I wanted to move to was how they experience empathy. So research shows if you have NPD, you have intact cognitive empathy. And what that means is you can understand other people's emotions, but you have compromised emotional empathy, which is the ability to care about other people's feelings or share the feelings that other people do. So you can know about them, but you may not have the ability to develop like a genuine connection or caring about that, which, if you think about it, can be very lonely, right? Because if you want to connect and you want to feel validated, it only goes one way. It's difficult to know what it feels like otherwise. Kind of like, talked about Tony Stark, and that was a very long road to get him to that point where he had to learn through loss.
Wow that you're saying this. I'm sure we've all seen this. A person, whether male or female, who is the problem. I've seen this, from the outside, and then whatever friend or partner is constantly at their attention, just doing and willing to do what it takes to serve their emotional needs. Is that what you're saying? And no reasoning with that person who's like throwing themselves emotionally to serve the emotional needs of the other. No reasoning with them of saying, hey, this is like a one-sided relationship right now. You're not really, it's nice that you're being nice and charitable and you're trying to be a good Christian and this and that. But he's just using you. Or from my impression, he's just using you. It's just it's just a one-sided thing. Even if he doesn't realize that he's just using you, he is just so full of himself, he or she, that they are not reciprocating that. I'm pretty sure we've all seen that, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I talked about attachment styles, and you can see a really toxic pairing of like anxious attachment, where you're constantly seeking validation and approval, and narcissism, where you're going to give it to someone conditionally. So if you need that validation, and maybe as a narcissist, you're getting something out of somebody with anxious attachment, you can feed into their need for approval by giving it to them under certain circumstances. So as long as they praise you in return, or you're always going to be the center of their universe, you're only going to reward them with what they're looking for intermittently, and you can really string someone along forever that way. So dangerous, yeah.
Yeah. Me another beer.
Yeah,
Boom. Satisfy my needs. Thanks, bro.
absolutely.
You keep
So
stroking his ego, Muay Thai.
You know, so probably be helpful to actually start defining it too, like more concretely. So it's important to know that people don't always display narcissism the same way. Uh, but as I mentioned, narcissistic NPD is part of cluster B personalities. It'd be really cool to talk about like psychopathy, antisocial personality, sociopathy, socio. Man, I can't speak tonight.
that word.
Sociop.
Paths. There we go. Anyways, there's an official definition. So the American Psychological Association says NPD is a clinical disorder characterized by core content components and behavioral expressions that lead to socioeconomic dysfunction. What that means, only a narcissist would know, perhaps. I have no idea. Maybe a narcissist made that, because it sounds very esoteric, not very helpful. We get a little more clarity with the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. So this is what I use as a clinician to diagnose people as well. The way they explain it is a little more clear. So like it's a pervasive pattern, like a consistent pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior. So like very grand behavior, need for admiration, as we mentioned, lack of empathy. There's actually 9 components. I'll go through them really quick. You don't have to take notes, but we'll kind of weave these in. So that grandiose sense of self-importance, you'll often hear them exaggerating achievements and talents. So there's a lot of embellishment. There's a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, ideal love. So you were talking a little bit about some of those. They believe they're special and can only be understood by other special or high status people. So I hear a lot of people say, you don't vibrate on my frequency. I only talk to people who vibrate on my frequency. I have no idea what that means. I guess I don't vibrate on that frequency. Obviously, they require excessive admiration, have a sense of entitlement. They take advantage of other people to achieve their own ends, and that classic lack of empathy, or is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of other people. Envy factors in too. So very envious of others, or believes that others are envious of them. Very arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitudes. So that's 9. You only need 5 to be a bona fide narcissist. Now, the temptation here is, I think at some point in our lives, we have had a lot of these happen. We may have required a lot of admiration at some point. We may have been preoccupied with a fantasy of power or success. We have definitely had envy before. So the temptation for many is to whip out the DSM, think of someone they hate, and be like, yeah, you have 5, 6, you have all of them. You're clearly a narcissist, especially if they begin to disappoint you. But the key word here is a pervasive pattern, with like also not just a multitude, but a magnitude. So it has to be not just in certain environments with certain people, but across the spectrum.
Have you ever been accused of being a narcissist? You, Chulo, Muay Thai?
No,
Not to
not
my
that I know
face,
of.
anyways.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, only you, Papi. That's it.
um, it's not. I have when in my 3rd year of a relationship, but it was when things were going downhill, and like you mentioned when you said that a person went out of the way to kind of like define it and then see the qualifications, and then she's seen the worst in me. Unfortunately, we kind of reached that point. We were close to breaking up, so I was called that, and maybe I was having narcissistic tendencies then when things were just not good for us. So mea culpa, if that's true. But happily out of that, and happily, and hopefully we're both in a better spot. Her and I, as far as I know, she's in a better spot. So yeah. So that's that. But I also wanted to say, Chulo and Muay Thai, like when you shared that you went to this conference for work, right? It was a work related thing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's interesting that you went to this and that it's a hot topic, but it totally makes sense in today's modern day and age, man. Like this is something where in a world of materialism, in a world of Hollywood, in a world where of Andrew Tates with Bugattis, um, they're praising being prideful. They're praising having selfish egos, and it's being normalized now. Women who are OnlyFans or have YouTube channels, from ridiculous things of selling, of portraying themselves in clothing, obviously in bodily portrayal as well, scandalous bodily portrayals, everything that's just to the lowest standards of what beauty is. And they're getting attention, they're getting praise, they're getting money. We've all heard the stories of OnlyFans women being invited by billionaires and millionaires to go attend their yachts, you know. So it's being reinforced, this lifestyle of being a prideful, which leads to being a narcissistic person, and it's no bueno. So when you said that you were going to this conference, I really thought, okay, this would be a good topic to talk about, because it's an issue that's dealing with today's society now. Yeah.
Yeah, big need. There's a lot of like American culture and to some extent North American culture, because you see this in Canada as well. We celebrate individuality
Mm.
almost to a fault, where you have, not to overly romanticize collectivistic cultures, they can also be very good in some ways, but
Communists over here.
yeah, we we have almost a preoccupation with being an individual, the American dream, pulling yourself up,
By your bootstraps.
by your bootstraps, yeah, and pursuing your dreams, moving to New York and making it in the big city, that kind of stuff, and like wanting fame for yourself. Even with social media, there's a lot of clout chasing. So there's a lot of narcissistic style endeavors that are normalized in what we do. So very difficult to root out what genuine narcissism can be or look like. I think it might be good to discuss like when we think of relationships, because narcissistic tendencies, this is where relationships don't thrive at all, but they require genuine attachment and meaning. So you need shared empathy. The grandiose version of narcissism sees relationships through a very distorted lens. So other people are an audience to their uniqueness, right? The people who serve the purpose of bolstering their image. So that's really important in a narcissistic relationship. When narcissistic defenses are working and intact, I kind of hinted at this, we see a lack of empathy, a lack of relatedness, and other people are used to serve as a function to prop them up, basically. The other side of it, when narcissistic defenses are failing, you don't see what's described in social media or even the DSM sometimes, right? I gave those 9 characteristics. A lot harder to spot. You see someone who's actually defeated in life, or they seem this way. They get diagnosed with depression sometimes. So a lot of diagnoses happen when like a defeated narcissist or someone with defeated narcissistic tendencies goes to counseling, not necessarily to become a better person, but maybe because they're not getting what they want out of life. So they see the therapist as someone to help them to get what they want. So making that differential diagnosis is when you start to uncover what's actually under their pain, you see their mental life is organized around fantasies. So of how special they are, how important they are, and how the world's not recognizing their talent, how it's unfair. Interpersonally, they'll talk about a series of broken relationships, and you'll see that as they talk about them, they are the central character. They're always the hero of that narrative. There's a lot of external locus of control where it's someone else's fault. This person did that. And the question I'm always tempted to ask is, yeah, we definitely see a pattern. And who's at the center of this pattern? It's you. Like you are the common denominator of all your relationships breaking down. But you can't say that for a session. You really have to work up to that.
That's not the first thing you say right out the gate.
No, you gotta work your way in.
Not to jump the gun here, but what should a person who's dealing with a narcissist do? From what I've seen in secular videos and even Catholic videos that address this issue, they both literally said you reach a point where you just have to walk away. You walk away because, especially if they're not willing to work with you or meet you halfway or even 1/3 of the way, they're constantly making you feel crazy about what's truly going on. Like you said before, Chulo, you said, am I the one who's crazy here? You know, and even if I heard a scenario in one of the podcasts where they presented an audio recording of what literally was said by that narcissist, and they will still turn it on you by saying, wow, you were that petty that you had to record this. Wow. And it would happen to be like a daughter of a narcissist, a mother narcissist, and she was sharing her testimony of like the things that she had to go through just to realize that she wasn't crazy. So what were the things that were suggested, like with dealing with an actual narcissist?
So the challenge is we're talking about a personality disorder. So when we talk about personality, we would like to think that they're all little Tony Starks out there and they can change. But one of the questions I love asking clients, especially when they ask about like relationships or should I break up with my partner or not, I always ask them, who's the person that you're determined to become? And who is the person that the person you care about is determined to become based on their actions? And when you hear what they have to say, when they think about it, you can only look at a history of behavior, things that they say, things that they do, and you want them to change perhaps, but you see who they're determined to become by what they're doing. And you have to take a step back. And sometimes the answer is to detach with love. So this also runs true with like addictions. This is a pretty big, when people go to Alcoholics Anonymous, let's say you're not the alcoholic, but your spouse is or whatever, they'll always say, you have to detach with love. And there's nothing that you can do to bring that person towards sobriety. In this case, there's nothing that you can do to maybe pull a narcissist. Well, I don't like calling people narcissists, but someone who is diagnosed with that disorder, you can't change them per se. You can't go into it and saying, I can save her. That's really tempting, right? So it's also dealing with behaviors. We can talk about that actually. There's when we talk about gaslighting, which is a tool that a lot of people who suffer from narcissistic tendencies, they use gaslighting a lot, but we could talk about how to tackle behaviors as well. But I'll wrap up describing NPD, and then we can get into what they do and what to prepare for. So one of the things to do to help yourself is to actually be able to identify it, right? So we talked about statistical or the diagnostic criteria, but if we're looking at it with people, I explained the depressed or the defeated narcissist. You'll see that depression. And one of the ways to detect that is to see what's under their sadness. Does it always come back to them? Are they at the center of all of those stories at the end of the day? In other instances, you'll see people, they could become very impatient or angry when they don't receive special recognition or treatment. So like Chulo gave a really good example of your friend with the Broken Spear podcast and what they were trying to do and getting recognition ahead of time, like immediately. Having major problems with others, easily feeling slighted. I was listening to a podcast with I think Dr. Jonathan Shedler, and he gave this example of like, let's say you live with someone who has narcissistic qualities. If you, maybe you're like me, you have ADHD, and you finish the dishes and you leave the soapy sponge in the sink, right? Someone with narcissistic tendencies may notice that and be like, hey, wait a second, take that sponge out, wring it dry and let it dry, or the bacteria is going to build up. Like, I don't like that. Don't do that. Like, okay, cool. Like, my mistake. I'll do that. But I have ADHD. I'm going to do it again. Maybe 5 times, 6 times. You're going to have to tell me a bunch of times. The second time I do it, the third time maybe, they might say, I can't believe you didn't do what I asked. You must think so little of me. Like, how much do you not care about me that you're not doing this thing for me? So it's not about the sponge. It's not about the sink, the bacteria, cleanliness. It's about them. Like, so your inaction or your forgetfulness becomes something for them to feel personally attacked for. So you have that tendency to personalize almost everything that happens, and it's all about you. So that's something to watch out for. That's one of these red flags that people talk about. So when I say multitude and magnitude, it's consistent and it is apparent a lot of the time. Sometimes it's a little more subtle, right? But you can see it, especially if you're seeing this pervasive pattern of behavior in little things like that. So there's reacting with rage, difficulty managing emotions, behavior, people who can struggle with stress and adapting to change, withdrawing for situations where they might fail. So there's another one too, is just not trying because you think you might fail. If you have narcissistic tendencies, you may never try baseball because you think you're going to suck. Like, you're not going to play sports to have fun. You play sports to win only, all the time. If I'm not going to win at it, I'm not playing it. That could be one of the mindsets. So real quick, I'll go into overt and covert narcissism. So overt's what we've been talking about. This is the Patrick Bateman, Tony Stark. So high self-esteem, pleasure-based motivation, weak behavioral inhibition. They have poor self-control, high life satisfaction. They're top of the world. They're restless. They're impatient when faced with barriers. Everything is an inconvenience to them that they can't stand. Low frustration tolerance, right? So covert or vulnerable narcissism is that depressed, defeated narcissist that I was talking about. Low self-esteem, inhibited motivation, less life satisfaction. There's those depressive tendencies. Very difficult to detect until you uncover what's beneath it, right? So hypersensitive, anxious preoccupation with their competence, a concealed sense of importance. Like, it's hidden, but it's not there. That's the covert side. There's a researcher named Russ. He has 3 subtypes. So there's grandiose and malignant, exploits others without concern for welfare. You'll see that happen. Fragile, alternating between feelings of superiority and inferiority. So one day they're on top of the world, the next day they need you to console them. High functioning or exhibitionistic, right? Attention seeking, competitive, charm and eloquence to achieve goals. Like you were talking about too, the histrionic symptoms can also come into play.
I thought we weren't going to bring up politicians. Sorry. Oh wait, never mind. You're just describing a narcissist. Never mind.
There you go. Yeah. That's it, right? Very deceptive, manipulative, right? The other thing I'll point out too is to know what it's not sometimes is entitlement or narcissistic behaviors don't mean someone's a narcissist, because we all make mistakes, right? But when we look at entitlement, there's adaptive entitlement. So positive, constructive entitlement that aligns with self-confidence and appropriate self-advocacy. So that's a fancy way to say you're assertive and healthily so. Maladaptive entitlement is you feel you deserve favorable outcomes without reciprocation. So do this for me, but I'm not going to do much for you. Special treatment, right? Being exempted from social expectations. When I talked about adolescence and narcissistic traits, this goes back to a friend of mine who was complaining about their a shift supervisor at a coffee shop, and the new employees, the young adolescents coming in, have such a high level of entitlement that they feel exempted from doing certain things in the store. Like, oh, I'm not making sandwiches. I don't want to do that. But you sign up for the job, you have to do the job description. But they'll just say, I'm not going to do it. No,
You're working at Subway.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'd rather not. No, I don't do that. No, yeah. I'm good. And they'll just opt out. You can't do that though, right? Yeah. But it's mad to see that happen.
For the sake of time, are there a couple of things you want to wrap up with? And then maybe Chulo, you and I could share what we grabbed from this, what Muay Thai shared.
Yeah, that's it for narcissism. So
yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like this whole thing has been about you right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Kind of like, it's kind of overwhelming me right now. And I'm just gonna.
It sounds like a personal problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna do what
the fact that I haven't had the attention is really bothering me right now. I'm sorry. I'm really hurt right now. How dare you guys not?
Chulo, please, if I could just say a couple words before you do, please. Like, I just feel like it's a tug of war right now. I thought we were partners. The things that really I grabbed from what you shared, and I will definitely take it to life, is because okay, yes, maybe we'll meet the narcissist one day, but I think I tend to meet the person who is dealing with person with a narcissistic tendencies, and then they ask for advice. I will now forever share. You have to identify what it will take for you. Oh, you said it so well. What will it take for you to reach what you want, to determine what you want? You said it so well.
Something about when you figure out that the person you're determined to become
Yeah,
and the
you have to
person
figure
that
out what you're determined to become. And if that's clashing with what this other person that you want to keep involved in your life is just going in opposite directions, then you just either have to you just have to admit it to yourself and then take an action. Of course, it sucks when you care for that person, um, um, family member, friend, been through the hard knocks, but they're just going through a phase where they're just doing their own thing. But you have to be willing to separate for the sake of love. How did you phrase it? Out of uh
detach with love.
detach with love. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like all key phrases that I will forever keep. And I'll probably watch this video myself just so I could remember it. How about you, Chulo? What would you say you grabbed from this
Well, I
podcast?
think it reaffirmed my understanding of what narcissism is. I don't know. I think that throughout this entire conversation, I was keeping in mind certain relationships, and then realizing I'm the center. No, no, no. I'm just kidding. But I don't know. Just that line that you said, detaching with love is necessary, and sometimes, I guess most of the times, you can't fix the person. There's nothing that you can do that's going to make the person be better. In the sense of saying you need to fess up the way for being a narcissist and start coming together within our community because you're a narcissist. And at times you just, like you said, you just have to detach. And I know from experience, I have detached from that, and it's probably some of the healthiest thing you can do. And I think that that goes into something that we weren't able to touch upon, are the virtues that that are needed when dealing with the narcissist. And one of it is prudence and temperance, and knowing when it's time to walk away from a relationship that's not healthy.
Because you'll never get an apology.
Yeah,
You'll never get an admission
yeah.
that is true to what a narcissist would be. So yeah, you're right. You'll never get that closure, and you have to be okay with that.
What's the wisdom of the internet? I once heard, be okay with never receiving the apology that you deserve, and that's okay, and just move forward from there.
Yeah. And just to close, we I know we wanted to talk about what would the Catholic response be in approaching narcissism?
Well,
What do
I
you
I
think?
I mean, honestly, it's practicing the virtues, because the Catholic virtues are in complete contradiction to what narcissism is: temperance, charity, fortitude, hope, prudence, and justice,
Humility.
the humility within all of this. Like all these things are the opposite of what narcissism is. So if you're able to practice these things, if you're a narcissist yourself and you're aware of these things and you want to step away from that, practicing the virtues is one of the things. The issue that I have is the person that I know to be a narcissist considered themselves Catholic, considers themselves to be a good practicing Catholic, but some of these virtues weren't practiced to to the heart of the reason for the virtues. So there might have been, fortitude, but it wasn't to the end that the person should have been approaching. So, but if you're dealing with the narcissist himself, then by living out these virtues, I don't know. I think you can find a sense of peace, and I think eventually what will happen is you're going to end up stepping away from this person's life because they don't help you practice these virtues like a good relationship should.
Yeah, well, the one of the things I'll add is to be able to detach with love. There's also um, we people talk about boundaries all the time, but healthy boundaries should take into account. I don't want to say keeping a door open per se, but what I do want to say is, in the same way you might deal with someone struggling with addiction, you're going to you might remain as open as you can be given your capacity, which is very important to know your own capacity, but you have to remain consistent. So you can model the behavior you want to see, and you have to be assertive and really lean on, we talked about adaptive entitlement. So be assertive about the respect you deserve, the treatment you deserve, and model the behavior you want to see as you detach with love. So if someone's coming to you and, maybe we didn't really talk about gaslighting, but they're trying to manipulate you, let's just say, you don't want to get drawn into that web and listen to things that they may try to manipulate you to do. Like, oh, if you cared about me, you would do this. You're a Christian, you do this if you cared about me. But it's then to model the behavior that you want to see from them. So you can then look to the shred of truth they're putting in their manipulation, because every good lie has a shred of truth, and you give them the fullness of of the faith in that way. So um, what true love looks like sometimes is to be able to say no. So there's that gentle correction, there's a fraternal correction, and as the Bible says, if you have an issue with someone, you confront them about that. So don't hold back. Like, don't just let them walk all over you. Confront them with love, and be assertive about what you deserve. And if they're not listening, you bring another person in, right? So you bring a brother of the community in, and you have a conversation. If they still don't listen, you might bring it to an elder, someone who is respected. And if they still don't listen, then you have your answer, right? They're determined to not listen. They're determined to be the kind of person who remains self-serving. So if you understand that about them, whenever whenever you feel the capacity to interact, if you ever do, it'll always have to be from a standpoint of, who's the person I'm determined to become, what virtues am I trying to practice, and how do I remain able to do that if I'm going to speak with this person at all? Because if they're dragging you down like a crab in a bucket, you can't let that happen. So that's really important.
Amen, amen. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another great podcast from the Papi and Chulo Show, an in-depth look into narcissism, its subcategories, how to approach it as a friend, a family member, the encouragement for anybody who deals with narcissism, pride. There's even a test you could easily take on Google. You could just search it. There's plenty of narcissism personality tests, and you can see where you're at. I would say it's good to know, because it's almost like taking a temperament test or a personality test, where you are able to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. So with that being said, I am Papi.
And I am Chulo.
You've called me Muay Thai, so I guess I'm Muay Thai.
Muay Thai Matt over here.
Muay Thai Matt.
We love you. We'll see you next time here at the Papi and Chulo Show.